The coast of Cornwall was quiet in the early morning light. Fishing boats moved gently across the water, and the sea looked calm and endless. Small stone houses stood close together, their windows facing the ocean that had fed families for generations. Children played near the shore, and church bells echoed across the village. It felt like a normal day. No one standing there could imagine that before the sun reached its highest point, everything would change forever. On the horizon, dark shapes slowly appeared. At first, they seemed like distant trading ships, but as they moved closer, their purpose became clear. These were not friendly merchants. Were fast-armed vessels flying unfamiliar flags. They belonged to the Barbary pirates, corsairs from North Africa who had already terrified many coastal towns across Europe. On that day, Cornwall became their target. The attack was sudden and merciless. The pirates moved quickly from ship to shore. Armed men spread through the village before most people understood what was happening. Houses were forced open. Flames began to rise. Men tried to fight with whatever tools they could find, but they were no match for trained raiders. Some were killed, others were beaten and tied. The sound of shouting mixed with the crackling of burning wood. Panic filled the air. The pirates were not there just to destroy. They were there to take captives. Around 400 English women were seized during the raid. Mothers were pulled away from children. Young girls were dragged from hiding places. Sisters clung to one another as they were forced toward the shore. Some begged, some resisted, and some were frozen with fear. The pirates worked with cold efficiency. They tied their captives and moved them quickly onto waiting ships. As the vessels pulled away from Cornwall, smoke still rising behind them, the women looked back at their homes growing smaller in the distance. For many, it was the last time they would ever see England. The journey across the sea was long and harsh. The ships were crowded, and space was limited. Food was rationed carefully, and clean water was scarce. The captives were guarded constantly. They did not know where they were going. They only knew that the ocean stretched endlessly around them, and there was no escape. Seasickness, fear, and exhaustion weakened many of the women. Some became ill. A few did not survive the voyage. Those who remained alive faced every sunrise with uncertainty. The sound of waves against the wooden hull became a constant reminder that their world had changed forever. After days that felt like weeks, the ships reached the coast of North Africa. The ports were busy and unfamiliar. Tall walls surrounded crowded cities. The language spoken there sounded strange to English ears. The women were marched through narrow streets, while people watched from windows and doorways. To the pirates and traders, they were valuable goods. Tutim selves. They were lost souls far from home. Soon they were taken to slave markets. The market was one of the most painful moments for many captives. Here, people were displayed and examined as if they were objects. Bias looked at their hands, their faces, their posture. Age and health determined value. Families that had somehow stayed together were separated again if different buyers made different offers. The process was cold and practical. There was no concern for dignity. Some women were purchased to work inside wealthy households. They cleaned, cooked, and served under strict supervision. Others were forced into harder labor, working long hours under the sun. A few were taken into private homes where their lives were tightly controlled. They had no legal rights and no freedom of movement. Their survival depended entirely on the behavior of their owners. Life in captivity was uncertain. Some masters were harsh and violent. Others were less openly cruel but still controlling. None allowed freedom. Punishment for disobedience could come quickly. Even small mistakes carried heavy consequences. Fear became part of daily life. Religion also shaped their experience. Many captives faced pressure to convert. Conversion sometimes meant better treatment or lighter work. Refusal could result in harsher conditions. For many women, faith became the only connection to their past. They prayed, quietly in secret. They whispered English hymns to themselves so they would not forget the sound of their own language. Holding on to belief became a way to hold on to identity. Back in England, news of the raid spread fear along the coast. Cornwall mourned its lost daughters. Churches organized prayers. Families searched for information through sailors and merchants. Efforts were made to gather money for ransom. Religious groups and diplomats sometimes negotiated for the return of captives. But ransom was expensive, and not every woman had someone able to pay. Rescue was uncertain and slow. In some rare cases, women were freed years later and returned home. But Returning did not erase the past. They had changed. England had changed. Some found it difficult to rebuild their lives. Others carried emotional wounds that never fully healed. For those who were never ransomed, life in North Africa became permanent. Youth faded. Strength weakened. Some were eventually granted limited freedom after many years of service. Others died in captivity, buried far from the land of their birth. The deepest suffering was often invisible. Living without control over one's own future slowly breaks the human spirit. Many learned to survive by staying silent. They avoided drawing attention. They followed rules carefully. Survival became their daily goal. History does not always speak loudly about these women. Books often focus on naval battles, kings, and political treaties. The suffering of ordinary people is mentioned briefly, if at all. Yet the Barbary raids affected thousands across Europe. Entire communities lived in fear of sudden attack. The story of the 400 women taken from Cornwall is only one example of a larger tragedy. Piracy in the Mediterranean and Atlantic was not only about ships and treasure, it was also about human lives turned into currency. Men, women, and children were captured and sold across continents. For the captives, survival required strength few had ever imagined needing. The raid on Cornwall reminds us how fragile peace can be. One quiet morning turned into a lifetime of loss for hundreds of families. The sea that once provided food and trade became a road to captivity. When we think about pirates, stories often show adventure and boldness. But for those taken from their homes, there was nothing romantic about it. It was terror, separation, and years of uncertainty. It was waking each day not knowing what would happen next. The women who survived showed a different kind of bravery. They endured without knowing if freedom would ever come. They held on to memory when everything familiar was taken away. They survived in silence, in a world that saw them as property. Their story deserves to be remembered, not as a small footnote in history, but as a powerful reminder of human resilience. Behind every act of violence are real people whose lives are forever changed. Behind every historical event are individuals who feel pain, fear, and hope. The raid on Cornwall was a moment in time, but its impact lasted for generations. Families were broken. Villages were marked by grief. And somewhere across the sea, English voices tried not to forget who they were. History often celebrates victories and strong empires, but sometimes the most important stories are those of survival. The 400 women taken by Barbary pirates were not soldiers or leaders. They were ordinary people whose lives became part of a larger conflict between nations and powers. Their suffering was real. Their courage was real. And even though many of their names are lost, their experience remains a powerful chapter in the long history of the sea. When we look at calm waters today, it is hard to imagine such terror crossing them. But centuries ago, the ocean carried both trade and tragedy. It carried hope for some and despair for others. The women taken from Cornwall faced years of uncertainty. Some may have found small moments of kindness in captivity. Some may have built quiet friendships. Others may have lived in constant fear. Every story was different, yet connected by the same beginning: a sudden raid, a burning village, and a ship sailing away. Their lives remind us that history is not only about rulers and wars. It is also about mothers separated from children, daughters taken from homes, and communities left in silence. The past cannot be changed, but it can be remembered, and remembering is a form of respect. The story of what happened after the raid is not one of glory. It is one of endurance. It is about people who continued to live even when their world was taken from them. Sometimes survival itself is the greatest act of courage, and in the quiet spaces of history, the voices of those 400 women still echo across the sea.